At my birthday dinner, everyone was laughing, until my grandpa smiled and said, "I'm so glad your parents finally used the college fund I set up for you." I paused, put my fork down, and said, "What college fund?" Everyone turned towards my parents, who were suddenly silent. And then my cousin pulled out his phone and showed this. I, 32M, never really celebrated my birthdays growing up. My parents always said money was tight, that we needed to be practical. So when my wife insisted on throwing me a big dinner this year with both sides of the family, I figured why not? I'd spent 3 decades being the responsible one, the one who never asked for much. One night of celebration seemed harmless enough. The restaurant was nice, nothing fancy but warm and comfortable. My wife had reserved a private room in the back where about 20 of us could fit around a long table. My parents sat near one end, looking slightly uncomfortable in a way they always did when someone else was paying. My grandpa, 83 and sharp as ever, had the seat of honor at the head of the table. My younger brother and his family were there, along with my wife's parents, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin who'd flown in from across the country. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories, and for once I felt like maybe I deserved this. My wife squeezed my hand under the table. We'd been trying for a baby for 2 years with no luck, and lately every family gathering felt heavy with unspoken questions. But tonight was different. Tonight was just about being together. Grandpa had been watching me all evening with this proud smile on his face. He'd always been my favorite person in the family, the one who actually listened when I talked about my interests as a kid, who remembered the small details of my life. When dessert came out, he raised his glass and everyone quieted down. He started talking about how proud he was of me, how I'd built a good life despite the challenges. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. He mentioned how glad he was that my parents had finally used the college fund he'd set up for me, that it must have made such a difference in helping me get established. I put my fork down slowly. The tiramisu in front of me suddenly looked nauseating. I asked him what college fund he was talking about. The table went silent. My grandpa's smile faltered. He looked confused, glancing between me and my parents. He explained that when I was born, he'd set up an educational trust fund with $50,000. He'd added to it over the years, bringing it up to nearly $80,000 by the time I graduated high school. He'd given my parents full access to distribute it as needed for my education and early adult expenses. I felt my wife's hand tighten around mine. I looked at my parents. My mother had gone pale. My father was staring at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Neither of them would meet my eyes. I never went to college. I'd wanted to desperately. I'd gotten accepted to a state school with a decent program for computer science. But my parents had sat me down the summer after graduation and explained that there was no money for college. They said I needed to be realistic, that college was a luxury we couldn't afford. They suggested I get a job, maybe take community college classes at night if I really wanted to. So that's what I did. I worked full-time at a warehouse, took night classes when I could afford them, and eventually clawed my way into an IT position through sheer persistence and self-taught skills. It took me 8 years to finish my degree, attending part-time while working full-time. I'd paid for every single credit myself. I graduated at 26 with $40,000 in student debt and a back that ached from warehouse work. I'd missed out on internships, networking, the whole traditional college experience. While my peers were building careers in their early 20s, I was stocking shelves and studying at midnight. My cousin, who was sitting across from me, had pulled out his phone. He was typing frantically, his face getting redder by the second. Then he turned the screen toward me. It was a Facebook post from 7 years ago. My mother's profile. She was standing in front of a brand new RV, one of those massive luxury models. The caption talked about how blessed they were, how hard my father had worked, how they were so excited to finally travel the country in retirement. The RV had cost at least $80,000 based on the model. The post was dated 2 months after I'd graduated from high school. My cousin kept scrolling. There were more posts. A kitchen renovation, a trip to Europe, new furniture, a boat, all within a few years of when I should have been in college. All while I was working myself to exhaustion and eating ramen to afford textbooks. I looked at my brother. He was younger by 5 years, and I suddenly remembered how he'd gone to college right after high school. A private college. I'd always assumed they'd somehow scraped together the money, maybe taken loans. I asked him directly if they'd paid for his education. He looked uncomfortable, but nodded. They'd covered everything, he admitted. Tuition, room and board, spending money. He'd graduated debt-free. My mother finally spoke up. She tried to explain that they'd thought I was more independent, that I didn't need the help as much as my brother did. She said my brother had been struggling in high school and needed the structure of a good college to succeed. She claimed they'd planned to help me eventually, but things had just worked out differently. My father added that Grandpa's money had been a gift to them, technically, to use for the family as they saw fit. He said they'd made the decisions they thought were best at the time. I asked them point blank where the $80,000 had gone. My mother started crying. My father's jaw was clenched tight. My aunt asked them directly if they'd spent my college fund on their RV. The silence was answer enough. My wife stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She told me we were leaving. I sat there for another moment, looking at my parents. My mother was sobbing now, reaching for me across the table. My father was trying to explain that they'd planned to pay me back, that they'd been about to tell me, that it wasn't what it looked like. But it was exactly what it looked like. They'd stolen my future. They'd looked me in the eye at 18 and lied. Let me believe I wasn't good enough or smart enough to deserve college. Let me struggle and sacrifice while they bought toys with money meant for me. And they'd done it knowingly, deliberately, for 7 years while watching me suffer. I stood up. My grandpa was crying too, apologizing over and over. I told him this wasn't his fault. He'd done something incredibly generous, and they perverted it into something ugly. I thanked my cousin for showing me the truth. Then I walked out without another word to my parents. My wife drove us home. I couldn't speak. I just stared out the window, trying to process the fact that my entire adult life could have been different. I could have had a normal college experience. I could have graduated at 22, gotten real experience in my field, avoided years of physical labor and sleep deprivation. My career could have been so much further along. My wife and I might already have a house instead of still renting. We might have been able to afford fertility treatments sooner. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd chosen sleep over socializing, every opportunity I'd missed because I was too tired or too broke, all of it had been unnecessary. All of it had been because of their selfishness. Update 1. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. My mother had sent about 30 texts, each more desperate than the last. She wanted to explain, to talk, to make me understand. My father had left a voicemail saying I was being dramatic and that I needed to respect my elders. My brother texted asking if I was okay, saying he'd had no idea about the trust fund. I didn't believe him. He was 5 years younger than me, so he would have been 13 when they bought the RV. But he'd gotten a free ride to private college while watching me struggle. He'd never once asked why I was working myself to death while he got handed everything. Either he'd known and said nothing, or he'd been so self-absorbed he never questioned the disparity. My grandpa called. He was devastated. He explained that he'd set up the trust when I was born because education had changed his life, and he'd wanted to give me the same opportunity. He'd checked in with my parents occasionally over the years, and they'd always assured him the money was being used appropriately. He'd assumed that when they said they were helping with my expenses, they meant college expenses. He'd had no idea I'd paid my own way. He told me he wanted to make it right. I told him there was nothing to make right, that he'd been the victim here too. But he insisted. He said he had some money saved and wanted to give it to me now. I refused at first, but he explained that he was going to revise his will anyway. He'd planned to split his estate between my father and my aunt, but now he wanted to leave my father's share directly to me and my brother instead. That's when I realized something. My parents were likely counting on an inheritance. My grandpa was a frugal man who'd worked hard his whole life. He owned his house outright, had a solid pension, and had always been smart with money. They probably expected several $100,000 when he passed. I started thinking about everything more clearly. My parents were in their early 60s. They'd bought the RV 7 years ago for what was probably my entire college fund. They'd also done expensive renovations, taken trips, bought a boat. Where had all that money come from? My father had worked in middle management and retired at 60. My mother had been a part-time teacher. Their combined income shouldn't have supported that lifestyle. I called my cousin, the one who'd shown me the Facebook posts. He worked in finance and had always been good at digging into things. I asked him if he could help me figure out exactly what my parents had been doing with their money over the past decade. He got back to me 2 days later. He'd done some careful research, cross-referencing public records and social media posts. The timeline he put together was damning. Right after I graduated high school, they'd taken out a home equity loan. Then came the RV purchase. Then the renovations. The European trip. The boat. They'd been living well beyond their means, leveraging their assets, and probably expecting my father's retirement and grandpa's eventual inheritance to cover it all. But here's what really got me. My cousin found out that 3 years ago, right around when my wife and I got married, they'd refinanced their house again. They'd pulled out another chunk of equity. I'd gotten married in a courthouse ceremony because we couldn't afford anything else. My parents had said they wished they could help, but money was tight. Meanwhile, they'd had access to tens of thousands of dollars that they were spending on themselves. My wife was furious when I told her. She'd always thought my parents were just struggling financially, that their constant talk about money being tight was legitimate. She'd felt bad for them. We'd even given them money occasionally when they claimed they couldn't afford things. 2 Christmases ago, we'd covered their car insurance for 6 months because my mother had cried about not being able to afford it. That was $1,500 we didn't really have, money that delayed our plans to start fertility treatments. I realized they'd been manipulating us for years. Every time they pleaded poverty, we believed them and helped out. We'd skipped vacations to send them money. My wife had worked extra shifts, and they'd been sitting on home equity and retirement accounts the whole time. Update 2. I decided I needed to confront them properly, but not emotionally. I needed documentation. My cousin helped me put together a timeline of everything we could prove. The trust fund documents that Grandpa provided. The Facebook posts showing their purchases. Public records of their home refinancing. Receipts I'd kept from times we'd given them money. Screenshots of their guilt-tripping texts. I also reached out to a lawyer. I wanted to know if there was any legal recourse. The lawyer explained that since the trust had given my parents discretion over distribution, and since I'd been over 18 when they'd spent it, there wasn't much I could do legally. The money had been legally theirs to manage. But he did note that my grandpa could potentially pursue something since they'd misrepresented how the funds were being used. Grandpa said he didn't care about legal action. He just wanted to fix things with me. Then my lawyer mentioned something interesting. If my parents had been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes during the years when I was supposedly in college, while actually pocketing the education funds, that could be tax fraud. He suggested I might want to look into that. I thought about it for a week. Did I really want to go after my own parents? Part of me just wanted to cut them off and move on. But another part of me couldn't stop thinking about all those nights I'd worked until my body ached, all the opportunities I'd missed, all the times my wife and I had struggled while they'd been living comfortably on stolen money. Then my mother showed up at my workplace. She came to the office building where I work and convinced the receptionist to calm me down. When I got to the lobby, she was there with tears streaming down her face, begging me to talk to her. She caused such a scene that my boss came out to see what was happening. I had to take her outside just to avoid getting written up. In the parking lot, she grabbed my arms and told me I was destroying the family. She said my father was having chest pains from the stress. She claimed my brother wasn't speaking to them either now. She swore they'd been planning to tell me about the fund all along, that they'd just been waiting for the right time. She said the RV had been a mistake, but they'd been going through a hard time and needed something to look forward to in retirement. I asked her about the refinancing. The second withdrawal of equity 3 years ago, right when I got married. What was that for? She hesitated. Then she admitted they'd had some debt they needed to pay off. Credit card debt from maintaining their lifestyle. She said they'd gotten in over their heads and panicked. So they'd stolen from me twice. Once when they took my college fund, and again when they chose to pay off their own irresponsible spending rather than come clean and help me. I told her I needed space. She started crying harder, saying I couldn't do this to them, that they were my parents and they'd made mistakes but they loved me. I walked back into my office and left her there. That night, my father called. He was angry now, not apologetic. He said I was being ungrateful and childish. He brought up everything they'd ever done for me as a kid, every sacrifice they'd made. He said raising me hadn't been cheap, and maybe the trust fund money had just evened things out. He actually said that they'd earned that money by being my parents. I lost it. I asked him if my brother had evened things out too by existing. Why did he get a free college ride? My father said my brother had needed more support, that I'd always been self-sufficient. I asked if self-sufficient meant desperate and lied to. He hung up on me. Update 3. My grandpa called me a few days later with news. He'd contacted a lawyer himself and had his will changed. He'd also set up a new trust for me, separate from his estate, with $100,000. He said it wouldn't erase what happened, but maybe it could help with the fertility treatments my wife and I needed. or a down payment on a house, or anything we'd been putting off. I cried. This old man who'd already been so generous was bailing out his son's mess. I tried to refuse again, but he said it was done, that the money was in my name and I couldn't give it back. He also told me he'd stopped talking to my father. They'd had a massive fight where my father had tried to justify everything, and Grandpa had told him he was ashamed to call him his son. My brother reached out finally. He wanted to meet for coffee. I agreed, curious what he had to say. When we met, he looked uncomfortable. He told me he genuinely hadn't known about my specific trust fund, but he'd suspected they were giving me a raw deal compared to him. He'd felt guilty about it, but had convinced himself that maybe I'd wanted to do things my own way. He admitted now that had been cowardice, that he should have questioned why our experiences were so different. Then he told me something that changed everything. He said he'd been arguing with our parents constantly since my birthday dinner. During one argument, my mother had broken down and admitted something. The reason they'd been so desperate for money 3 years ago, the reason for that second refinancing, wasn't just credit card debt. My father had a gambling problem. He'd been hiding it for years, but it had gotten bad. He'd lost significant amounts at a local casino and had been trying to chase his losses. The refinancing had been to pay off gambling debts. They'd been living in fear of debt collectors. My brother said our parents had been planning to declare bankruptcy quietly, but then Grandpa's inheritance would have been at risk, so they'd been holding on hoping to pay things down before he passed. They'd been viewing me and my brother as eventual financial safety nets. I felt sick. Not only had they stolen my education and my early career, but they'd done it to fund a gambling addiction. Every dollar I'd given them over the years had probably gone straight to a casino. Every time they'd cried poverty, they'd been lying to cover up my father's addiction. My brother apologized for not saying anything sooner. He'd found out about the gambling 2 years ago, but my parents had begged him to keep it secret. He'd been helping them financially too, though not as much as we had since he had his own family. He said he wanted to make things right and asked what he could do. I told him the truth. I wasn't interested in maintaining a relationship with our parents anymore. They'd had multiple chances to come clean, multiple moments where they could have chosen honesty. Instead, they'd chosen to manipulate, lie, and steal. I was done. As for him, I needed time to figure out if I could trust him again. I also told him that I'd looked into the tax fraud angle. I'd requested my own IRS records and found that yes, my parents had been claiming education credits during years when I wasn't in college. They'd been getting tax breaks for my education while I was paying for it myself. My lawyer said this was definitely reportable. My brother went pale. He asked if I was really going to report them to the IRS. I said I was still deciding, but they'd committed fraud and I wasn't sure why I should protect them from the consequences. The fertility treatments my wife and I started with Grandpa's money worked on the second try. We found out last month that she's pregnant. When we told Grandpa, he cried happy tears for the first time since my birthday dinner. We told him we're naming the baby after him if it's a boy. My parents found out about the pregnancy through social media. My mother sent a long message about how excited she was to be a grandmother, how this was a fresh start for the family, how babies bring people together. She said she hoped I'd forgive them now that I was becoming a father myself, that I'd understand the difficult choices parents have to make. I blocked her number. I blocked my father too. I told my brother that if he shared any information about my child with them, we'd be done as well. He agreed. I reported the tax fraud 3 weeks ago. I included all the documentation my cousin and I had gathered. I don't know what will come of it, but at least I've done what I can to ensure they face some consequences. My wife asked me if I feel guilty about it. I told her honestly that I don't. They had so many chances to do the right thing. They could have come clean at 18 and helped me find other resources. They could have admitted the truth when I was struggling through night school. They could have been honest when we were giving them money. They could have shown genuine remorse after being exposed at my birthday dinner. Instead, they chose to double down, to play victim, to blame me for being hurt by their betrayal. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. I'm 32 years old. I'm finally debt-free. My wife and I are about to become parents. We're looking at houses with Grandpa's gift. My career is solid despite the delayed start. I built a good life in spite of my parents, not because of them. And I'm done lighting myself on fire to keep them warm.